welcome to the Center for Governance and Markets. This is our final event of the semester, and we're just really delighted to have all of you with us today. My name is Jen Murtazashvili. I am the director of the center and a professor in the School of Public and International Affairs. And it is a real honor to have all of you with us for this final event, this panel discussion of Adam Crepelle's wonderful new book, Becoming Nations Again, The Journey Towards Tribal Self-Determination. And we have just a distinguished panel of experts here with us today to discuss his book, to talk about the important and impactful research that he's done that really not only, shapes, I think, a research agenda, but really shapes how we see tribal self-determination here in the United States. It's really a path-breaking book. And one of the things I should mention before we get going, it is an open source book, so you can download it for free from the Cambridge University Press website. Really encourage you to do. I know the discussion that we have today will stimulate a lot of discussion, and I really do hope that all of you have a chance to engage with this important work. Before we begin, just a little bit about our center. We're a relatively new center here at the University of Pittsburgh, just about 5 years old. And the mission of our center is to explore the innovative ways people come together to solve problems. And I think that there is no better example of this than the work that Adam has done in his book. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic off to Ilia Murtazashvili, who will introduce our distinguished panel and then begin the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Adam, it's great to have you here. And our plan is to get right into Adam's book, and then we will proceed to have our panel discussion. But I wanted to welcome here Governor James Naranjo of the Santa Clara Pueblo. Governor Naranjo was also a former police chief, and so he brings a wealth of knowledge on all sorts of issues that we're going to be talking about today. Ambassador Sherry Treppa, the former chairperson of the Habematolel Pomo of Upper Lake. Ambassador Treppa is the former chairperson and will speak to that role as well. And so first, we're going to hear from Adam about his excellent book, Becoming Nations Again, The Journey Towards Tribal Self-Determination. So Adam, take it away.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you all for having me. I'm honored to be here. Thanks to Ilia and Jen for organizing the book talk. Thanks to Grace and Luna for helping with all the logistics and making this possible, and to everyone for being here. Yeah, so my book, as the name suggested, Becoming Nations Again, The Journey Towards Tribal Self-Determination. And the inspiration for it is basically lots of conversations I've had. I'm sure the governor and Chairperson Treppa have had too, just explaining to people like, what is a tribe? Why do they still exist? So that was kind of the inspiration for it. There's lots of stereotypes, and unfortunately, those stereotypes are baked into the law and policy to this day, and they cause lots of problems for tribes. So that's the goal of this book, to try to show why some of the challenges tribes face, and then set forth the path forward. So I guess I didn't need to add a title slide since they already had a better one. But anyway, and I guess starting point, there's lots of stereotypes about tribes, and they tend to stem from a tribal economy. So one end is every tribe's rich from casinos. The rich casino Indian stereotype is a very prominent one. And that's true for about 10 out of the 574 tribes. But for the other tribes, if you're located in the middle of South Dakota, for example, it doesn't matter how nice your casino is, nobody's going. So geography is the key for that. And the other stereotype is tribes struggle economically because they have this cultural aversion to economic development. Prior to European arrival, Indians didn't have private property or engage in trade. They were just one with nature, chasing buffalo, picking berries. That's the other narrative. And that's used to explain some of the poverty reservations have. And, you can see, tribes or Indians have the highest poverty rate in the U.S. And I use the term Indians because that's the legal term. 25 of the U.S. code is actually Indians. So it's the legal term of art. Indians have the highest poverty rate in the US in general. And if you look at the number of Indians who actually reside inside of Indian reservations or on tribal land, it's actually closer to 40%. So very big problem. Unemployment rates are consistently over 50%. And for perspective, during the Great Depression, the US unemployment rate was 25%. Indians are dealing with 50% unemployment rates on reservations for generations. And of course, this leads to lots of socioeconomic problems, housing that's grossly inadequate. And you wonder why COVID was so bad on reservations. You have overcrowded houses without adequate sanitation. And this, of course, leads to crime and other socioeconomic problems. And, people think, this is part of culture, and it's not at all. And this is one of the big things I hope to dispel with the book. Prior to European arrival, a lot more was going on than's often presented. Most Indians were not nomadic prior to 1492. We got Governor Naranjo here, Santa Clara, Pueblo. They lived in pueblos. You're not picking up a pueblo and moving it down the street. It's pretty sedentary. Most tribes live in permanent dwellings or semi-permanent dwellings. What we mean by semi-permanent is that would migrate based upon seasonal events. So like, deer running, a few miles north, let's move up there. Ducks are in town, let's go where the ducks are going to be. I guess a modern day example is I went to law school at the University of Arizona. I arrived in Tucson in late July, early August, nice and mellow, park wherever you want, good times. Come December, can't do that. Why? We got all these damn Yankees in town getting out the snow. Are they nomadic people? No, they're just getting the hell out the snow. Indians figured the same thing out. You take advantage of seasonal events. So that's what tribes did. And most tribes or establishments would have been relatively small. And that's the case to this day in the US. Most cities are relatively small. Even big American cities are pretty small on the global scale. But some indigenous cities were quite big. Cahokia is the best known example. Located near present-day St. Louis, it would have been one of the largest civilizations in the world at this time. It was larger than London, larger than Paris, from about 1000 to 1300. And the Cahokians built structures bigger than the Great Pyramids in Egypt. That's something that's not in the history books. It's worth noting that Thomas Jefferson knew about this. It's actually in his journals. But it didn't jive with the simple hunter-gatherer narrative. So let's just keep that out the history books. And my favorite thing, as far as I'm concerned, I think is the coolest. Genetic evidence now shows that about 1/3 of the people at Cahokia were immigrants from west of the Rocky Mountains, east of the Appalachians, and south along the Gulf Coast. So people are actively migrating to Cahokia. And for perspective, there's no horses, no planes, no trains. There's no Instagram saying, hey, come hang out at Cahokia, check out all the local attractions. Word just got around organically through indigenous institutions. So that's pretty impressive in perspective. About 1/3 immigrant population, that would put Cahokia about as cosmopolitan as New York City or Los Angeles. So pretty vibrant cultural place. When you have lots of people living together in a diverse society, you have to have a sophisticated governance structure to keep people, from not stabbing each other and things like that. So we know Cahokia would have had that. And Chaco Canyon is another great example in present-day New Mexico. Chaco Canyon, it's a grand civilization. The largest building, Pueblo Bonita, is considered to be the largest apartment building in the world until the year 1882, when New Yorkers finally built a building larger. Pueblo Bonita has over 700 rooms. And for perspective, Chaco Canyon, it's in the middle of the desert. The nearest source of timber is 50 miles away, and there's no river. So the Indians cut down the trees, transported them 50 miles to build it there. And it's thousands and thousands of trees. That's tremendous social engineering feat. And that's just two examples. There's numerous other ones like Moundville in Alabama, the Dawes in Oregon, and the list could go on, Castle Montezuma in Arizona. And the point is, if you're going to have all these people living together, you have to have some kind of governance institutions to keep people together in functioning society. And my favorite, to the stereotype point, is that all tribes engaged in trade. There's lots of cool examples. So lightning whelks that only grow along the Gulf Coast, they're found as far north as Manitoba, Canada. So somebody pulls the lightning whelk out the Gulf of Mexico, then it gets traded all the way out to Canada. Copper mined in the Great Lakes makes its way all the way down to Tampa Bay, Florida. Shark teeth caught in the Caribbean are found at Cahokia. Cocoa beans in South America are walked up all the way up to present-day Chaco Canyon. And again, there's no horses, no river that's flowing that way. So people are trading it all that way up north. Not just cocoa beans, but macaw feathers too. So very vibrant trade networks. Turquoise mined in Arizona makes its way all the way down to Guatemala and up to Canada. And whenever the Jesuits arrived in the Great Lakes, they said, we're not even going to try to trade stuff. We're going to give it to the Indians because they can transport it faster. So that's the indigenous institutions at work. And my favorite is, I know Chair Treppa deals with this a lot in her line of work on tribal economic development. Well, it's not part of tribal culture to do these things. Well, lots of things weren't part of tribal culture, like other cultures, they evolved. The stereotypical Indian image of Indians is often a guy on a horseback. Well, guess what? Indians didn't have horses till after the Pueblo revolts. So in a span from about 1680 to 1850, Indians completely transformed their cultures. And not just transformed their cultures, but according to the US military, they were the best horsemen to ever live. Think about that. There's no user manual, no YouTube video about how to ride a horse. Indians figured that out all by themselves and became better than the US military at that. People descended from Europeans who've had horses for millennia. And not only did their cultures evolve, you take on new things. So for example, the Sioux teepees tripled in size once you get a teepee. Why? You can pull a lot more stuff when you got a horse than when you're carrying it by dog. So Indians like things too, And you might be like Adam. Well, I've seen Avatar and I'm going to see the new one, the Na'vi. They're great with nature and they're just like the Indians, right? So they can just magically connect with the horse. So of course they're going to be good with animals. Well, what about guns? The Indians were great with guns according to Europeans. In fact, by the 1610, Europeans are writing, the Indians excel the Christians at marksmanship. Again, nobody taught them how to do it. They just figured it out by themselves. And on the cultural evolution front, tribes in the northeastern U.S. are actively incorporating firearms into their religious practices by the 1640s. Where's the NRA on this one? This should be like a big boost for tribal sovereignty. Hasn't taken off yet, but trying. And Indians too. They revolutionized the way people use firearms. You guys have all seen movies like The Patriot. How do Europeans fight in the 1700s? Let's all line up. You guys ready? You guys ready? Shoot. Bunch of people die. Let's do it again. Indians said, this is stupid. There's actually transcripts of them saying, this is stupid. We do not want to stand still and be shot. So how does this work? The Dutch actually start making guns designed for Indians. It's 2 feet shorter and half the weight, so you can run around and not be shot. What a novel idea. Indians figured that out pretty quickly. They didn't want to be shot. And as far as cultural adaptation too, tribes along the Great Lakes are actively complaining. The elders, if our young people get cut off from firearms, they won't be able to hunt. Because why would you bother using a bow when you have a gun? That's like me. Technically, I could get to work without my GPS, but why would I? So it's kind of the same thing with tribes. And tribal legal institutions evolved to these new technologies as well. So tribes, the main thing they exchange for firearms is furs. So the beaver in particular starts being depleted because they like having guns. So when they notice they're getting depleted, what do tribes do? They develop property rights regimes in beaver territories. So the beavers don't go extinct. And we know it worked relatively well because we still have beavers. And they develop numerous other laws to serve similar purposes too. And just like other people, Indians responded to market incentives. When the price of furs were higher, what did Indians do? They killed more beavers. When they dropped, they didn't kill as many. Likewise, when Europeans hungry, guess what happened to the price of corn? It goes up. Indians respond to incentives just like everybody else. And one of my favorite stories is in the New York area. The Dutch colonists, they actually banned the sale of baked goods to Indians. They were so successful at the fur trade, they could pay more than the Dutch were willing to pay for cookies. And the Dutch weren't happy about this, so they made it illegal to sell cookies to Indians. So, yeah, market incentives at work. And if you can't do it, protectionism. But anyway, and Europeans always knew this. This is not me making it up. Here's John Smith of Pocahontas fame. Each household knoweth their own lands and gardens. Some would call that private property. Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island, talks about Indians actually selling their lands and knowing exactly where the boundaries are demarcated. And a French priest in New Orleans, writing about the Tunica tribe, said, the Tunica chief is very expert at business, and he always takes pride in being the best dressed man in European fashion. So cultural evolution at work. The Tunica chief didn't think he was any less Indian because he was wearing a European suit. He just thought it looked cool. But anyway, so Europeans always knew indigenous cultures evolved, and Indians responded to market incentives just like other people. But the narrative starts to change soon after the U.S. founding. And one case in particular continues to haunt tribes, and that's Cherokee Nation v. Georgia. The case arose, it's right around the Indian Removal Act. It was passed in 1830, and the Cherokee, they're actually doing quite well economically. They've got a Western-style government, And the per capita income is just as high, if not higher, than the local whites. And their literacy rate is actually triple that of the local white population. So this presents an awkward stereotype when you're saying they can't compete with the local whites when they actually have more money and can read better. But Georgia wanted the gold they had. So Georgia passes a law annexing the Cherokee territory. And the Cherokee respond, being one of the so-called civilized tribes, by filing a lawsuit in the U.S. Supreme Court. And everybody knew Georgia was wrong legally. The only question was, could the Cherokee Nation bring the claim? And to bring the claim, the Cherokee Nation had to establish that it was, in fact, a foreign nation. Toward this end, the Cherokee Nation argued, hey, we have a treaty. Only foreign nations can make treaties. We have treaties with the U.S., we have treaties with Britain. Moreover, we have our own land, our own language, our own laws. These are the things that make a nation. And to boot, Cherokees are not American citizens. What is a group of people, a government composed of people who are not American citizens, but a foreign nation? Chief Justice Marshall says this is a, quote, imposing argument. And how does Georgia counter? Exactly. They don't show up. Cherokee makes an imposing argument. Georgia doesn't even show up. But Georgia wins because Chief Justice Marshall decides the Cherokee Nation is not a foreign nation. Rather, it is a, quote, domestic dependent nation. That means the relationship between the tribes and the U.S. government is that of a ward to his guardian. And that's the relationship that the tribes continue to have with the U.S. government. Now we just call it the trust relationship because it sounds better, but it all goes back to this classification. And nearly 200 years later, it's really all still there. In 1975, the U.S. officially adopted a policy of tribal self-determination, giving birth to the trust relationship, or what we call the trust relationship now. But it still has lots and lots of bureaucracy and constraints on tribal government that do not exist on other governments. So on the bureaucracy front, tribes still do not own their land. Rather, the federal government owns the underlying title. And if tribes want to do something, it basically takes an act of Congress or some other sort of federal permission before it can happen. And we have all these antiquated laws. My favorite are the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act going back to 1790, still on the books. So if you want to do business with a tribe, according to federal law, technically you have to get a license before you can. And even Indian gaming, people assume tribes just push a button and a casino pops up. I'm sure Chair Treppa and Governor Naranjo will assure you it's not quite so easy to get a casino going. There's lots of hoops you have to jump through before it happens. And on the jurisdictional front, you know, and anywhere else, like Ilia says something silly to me on a roundhouse kick him, Pittsburgh PD is going to come in and cuff me. They're not going to ask, are you Indian? Are you not an Indian? Or do you live in Pittsburgh? Do you not? But that's how it works in Indian country. If something bad happens on a reservation, cops ask, are you an Indian? Is the person you hurt an Indian? Was it on trust land? What was the crime? They do all of this before they can arrest the bad guy. And obviously that's not efficient for law enforcement. So that contributes to lots of the problems in Indian country, most famously or infamously, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls crisis. And the same thing applies in civil jurisdiction. If you have a breach of contracts on a reservation, do you do that in tribal court, federal court? A car wreck, tribal court, federal court? And nobody knows the answer in many cases, and these cause all sorts of confusion. If you're a business, you just don't want to deal with that. So that's why there's so little investment in Indian country. And my solution to all of this is, hey, let's just treat tribes as nations again. That was the original plan. That's what they originally operated prior to 1492. And is actually embedded in the Constitution. The Indians not tax clause. That was not some DEI provision. That's a recognition of tribal sovereignty. Indians are citizens of their governments, and we're recognizing them as such. And it's also consistent with federal policy since 1970. And, you know, people often talk about federalism and all its benefits. You know, if you think it's good that New Mexico and Arizona can have different laws, just isn't it better if the Pueblos can do stuff if New Mexico passes a silly law? You know, it just creates more jurisdictional competition, all the things people claim to like with federalism. And towards the same ends, you know, if we respect tribal sovereignty, it actually increases individual liberty. You know, if you don't like something the state's doing or other people are doing bad things, go to the tribes and it'll increase individual liberty. So basically, that's the premise of my book. And welcome any questions you guys have. And thank you very much for coming out.
I think we can start with bios for our excellent guests. So Chair Treppa, would you like to say a little bit about your background, knowledge, experience, tribe, whatever you feel like so everybody can get to know your background?
Thank you. And want to say thank you to all of you that came out and took the time to listen tonight. I definitely appreciate it. It's always good to understand new things. And as a former chairwoman, education, higher education specifically was big priority for me. And when the tribe first started generating revenue, that was the first thing we did, was set aside money for scholarships. So great to be in another higher education facility. So I am currently the ambassador. I spent 20 years on my tribe's executive council, 16 years as the chairwoman. Up until last year, I was the chairwoman. I bring somewhat of a unique perspective because of the history of my tribe, and I'll try to condense hundreds of years down to just a minute or two. My tribe went through, many horrific times. If you went back to the 1850s, there was a cavalry action against my tribe, massacred many women and children. The early 1900s, one of many misguided federal policies was to forcibly put tribes on reservation lands. Our tribe's lands eventually grew to be about 560 acres over the next, 70 some odd years. And then one of the federal policies in the 50s was termination. It was an attempt of the federal government to forcibly assimilate tribes into the prevailing culture. And then our tribe, because of that, the lands that were in trust, the 560 some odd acres, come out of trust and are allotted to those that were recognized as our members at the time. That means that those lands that they now received were taxable. That meant that a community of people that had been on a reservation for possibly their whole lifetime now had to pay taxes on that land, which, most were uneducated, unskilled, et cetera. So many sold their lands or lost to back taxes. Enter the 70s. Our tribe sued the federal government for wrongful termination. We won a decade later. So it overturned that congressional action. We were never not recognized. Our lands were no longer owned by the tribe, although our boundaries for those lands were never disestablished. So that's important when it comes to applying for lands to go into trust. And I'll not go into that at this point, but we won our lawsuit, but the federal government said we had to reestablish our constitution. So we had to go back through a secretarial election process. Took us another, 10 years to do. By the time 2004 came around, we were just getting our secretarial election done. That meant we now had, we held elections for our 7-member executive council. I ran for vice chair. I won, and that was the tribe off and running. We had 2 grants, no land, no discretionary income. We had nothing. And talk about this book reflecting our experience. That's exactly, we started from nothing. And we thought about the economic development activities that we needed to be able to start building our nation. And at that time, the only thing that attracted the necessary capital was gaming. So we partnered with someone that helped us, eventually build a casino. But in reacquiring our land, we had very little money and there was a very small budget. So we were only able to put into trust 11 acres. It took us 32 months to do that. And that was a record for a tribe putting land in trust for gaming. And I'll shorten it, but I wanted to set the table for where other questions and the perspective that I brought because of our experience with gaming and the challenges that we experienced. And so hopefully that's sufficient.
Thank you very much, Governor Naranjo.
Good evening. James Naranjo, Governor of Santa Clara Pueblo. Nawe biagindika vaikinakunda po nata wiwegija hishchandigo vi angsham ema taginenhana ke wisigipuri wisekanapuri newa vikemari muwagri newe uvi eskwela mengu Pittsburgh vaikinakunda po ka hishchandigo vi angsham ema visotu pave newa vitungjong vi hapo ongipe o hame ujetsa ke at ori muwagri. My name is James Naranjo, the governor of Santa Clara Pueblo. I open with my Tewa language. I was born and raised in the reservation. We're about 100 miles north of Albuquerque, 40 miles north of Santa Fe. We reside right on the Rio Grande River. We encompass about 56,000 acres where we go from 5,000 feet to 10,000 feet. We have at least 2,000 members in our village. My Indian name is Pujeta, is where the rabbits gather. Puje is a sacred mountain where our ancestors lived. In 1540, when the Europeans came to the United States, our people were still occupying our original homelands of Puye, which is 8 miles just west of our current village. And so we go back from time immemorial, living in the cliffs where, as my colleague here mentioned, we're apartment builders. We were one of the first apartment builders ever. And we continue to thrive off our land. We're rich in our culture. We're rich in our ways of life. But we still continue to live off the land. But most of all, we're rich in our language. Without our language, we'll be lost. Our language is is the glue that holds us together in our community. There are 19 pueblos in New Mexico, for those of you that don't know. At one time, there was 244 pueblos in New Mexico. We're down to 19 pueblos, 2 Apaches and the Navajos. So New Mexico is a unique state. We have 19 governors plus the governor of New Mexico. So we have 20 governors and 3 presidents, the 4 presidents, including President Trump. So we have the Apaches in the south, the Apaches in the north, the Navajos, and then our president. So we do come from a very unique state. I'm a retired law enforcement officer from Santa Fe County. I served 20 years plus. I also worked in corrections in the prison for a couple of years when I was a young man. I ran the K-9 department, and I did SWAT department. I was a traffic homicide, and then of course I worked on the streets for my parents told me to go play on the road, so I made it a career. I retired in 2008, and I came back to my village, and I've been the lieutenant governor. I was lieutenant governor for 9 terms, and now I'm a governor for my first term as governor. I also sit on the 19 Pueblo cultural chairman for all our Pueblos. And so we're very, very special Pueblo people. The northern Pueblos, there's 8 northern Pueblos, 6 of us speak one language. The northern villages, Taos and Pickery, speak their own language. The 10 southern, they speak Caresin, Toa. The Zunis and the Jemez have their own language. And so I'll just give you a little history. We have elected officials every year. Some of our Pueblos are constitutional tribes, and some are traditional tribes. Us in Santa Clara, we're a constitutional tribe. Our constitution was in 1934. And so we are appointed from our respective kivas or respective churches. And then the people vote on who they want as governor, lieutenant, sheriff, interpreter, secretary, and treasurer. And then we have 8 respectful councilmen from our respective 4 churches, or kivas, we call them. And some of the other tribes, they're appointed by their cacique, by their traditional leaders. And their terms are either 1-year or 2-year terms. I'm on a 1-year term with up for re-election again next year. And through our constitution, I can serve as governor until I'm 65. So I'm hoping not to go that far. I'm hoping I can retire and come back to Pittsburgh, right? But as part of my opening, I want to thank you all for allowing me to be here and to share my experience with you and to share my leadership from working for the state and federal government and now working for my tribe on a different level, and all the challenges that I've seen and faced as a young man to now being a leader and trying to find the solutions to help our communities thrive. Pueblo law is a lot different than other Indian law because we've been in existence since the early 1500s. As mentioned before, the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, while Washington and the East was being built, and all the challenges that were here on the East, we already had our civil war with the Spaniards. We fought off the Mexican government. We fought off all the other Norman tribes. And we fought off the United States, and we're still in existence today. And that's the key of Pueblo law, is that, as mentioned, we just can't get up and move. They built the atomic bomb in Los Alamos, which is right next door to us. It was considered a sacred city to others, but not to us. Our people work for Oppenheimer. Our women and uncles and aunties work for Oppenheimer to work on the atomic bomb for our freedom. And so Los Alamos is still in existence. We have the challenges that we face with Los Alamos and the National Laboratory next to our community. And we also face the challenges of alcohol, drugs, fentanyl, just like any other community. We've established VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. I've been a big advocate for the missing women and murdered Indigenous people and non-Indians for most of my career, running cadaver dogs on the Mexican border, running cadaver dogs all across the Western United States in search for closure for the families. And I take it to heart that what we're trying to do on the tribal side, how we can get more assistance from the federal government to help us solve or bring closure to a lot of these families that are out there. Nowadays, we're facing the epidemic of fentanyl, which is devastating our children. It's devastating our communities across the country. And so we're huge advocacies on fighting the war on drugs and alcoholism. But I want to thank you all again, and we can go into more details as we move forward. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you. Adam, would you like to add a bit more on your background before we get into our questions? Okay, so we'll get it. We chatted about a number of questions. I think that would be good for everyone on the panel. And of course, if anything comes up that relates to Adam's book, feel free to raise it. But these questions are open to the group. So the first question that we had here, as tribal leaders, you navigate relationships with federal, state, and local officials. What misperceptions about tribal sovereignty do you encounter most frequently, and what role does educating about tribal sovereignty play in strengthening government partnerships?
I'm good. I'll go first. In my experience, it's unfortunate, but I think the challenges stem from just, not having an experience or not being educated. Frankly, it depends on the person and the agency, and the state, if you will, that we've encountered as to the differences of knowledge base. I think more recently, Adam mentioned it earlier, we are tribal nations. We are governments. We have citizens. We enact laws. We're governed by them. We are not races. We've had challenges of late because of the DEI that's bubbled up to the top around a lot of conversations with the federal government of late. But there are so many different notions of what tribal sovereignty is, and frankly, I see that across tribal nations as well. If we're dealing with states that have tribes in them, oftentimes there is a notion of sovereign immunity really tends to be the thing that comes to their mind because they may have had to litigate against a tribe. And most don't know this, but tribes, generally speaking, as tribal governments, state laws do not apply, generally. Federal laws typically do, unless there is something specific in that federal law that treats tribes differently or exempt tribes from federal laws, like FMLA. That does not apply to tribal governments. So we've run into a multitude of perceptions of what tribes are. I do believe that in our early days of just reestablishing our modern government in 2004, because we were a landless tribe, and by the way, I should mention, we are from Northern California, so there are 109 federally recognized tribes in California. Many of them are much smaller from a land-based standpoint. Many, like my tribe, went through congressional termination, so there are still some that are landless in California. But as states go, because there are so many federally recognized tribes in California, the state and the officials in the state now have a better notion and a better understanding of tribal governments because and since gaming. Because once there are, revenues in a tribal government, they tend to want to do a lot more outreach and government relations. And because of gaming, although not every tribe is successful from gaming, certainly it has become a means to many of the tribes in California. Many of the big gaming tribes are from California. But in our experience in the early days, although we do deal with a lot of county officials, state officials, and federal officials, I think we took a perspective when we started establishing those relationships that it was a vital and necessary effort to undertake. We're a landless tribe. We are attempting to put land in trust in a community where in Lake County, there are 7 federally recognized tribes there. 3 already had casinos when we first passed our constitution. We understood that not only would our patrons be community members, not necessarily tribal community members, but also our employees. So it was a necessary undertaking to attempt to build those relationships very early on. I think we were the first tribe that actually reached out proactively to the community and the county we are in to start building those relationships. And I think that informed the way that we have dealt with from a government relations standpoint, everything since. We had such a beneficial result from those undertakings that it just grew beyond not only our community, but to the state of California and to many states across the United States. Because of the type of business we are now in, we understood the more you educate, the better the people receiving your message on the other side will be. They'll understand what it means to be a tribal government. They'll understand why we have economic development. Most states and other sovereigns tax their people to support their government. Tribes historically can't, although they can tax their people, but because of the historic impoverishment, that is a losing battle. So because we don't have a tax base, we must look at other avenues for a revenue stream. And so that's why tribes undertake economic development. But I think to your question, there are the misunderstanding of the application of state laws versus federal laws, that not every tribe generates a ton of money from gaming, that there are a multitude of federal laws that, such as the Indian Child Welfare Act, that tribes abide by. And I don't think there is a general understanding also of jurisdiction. So we're in a PL 280 state. That is where there is concurrent civil jurisdiction. I think there are, I don't know how many states that have that are PL 280, but because of a recent lawsuit, there is more discussion around civil jurisdiction. So it is vital. I think we've been very successful at it. We've taken a local experience and gone national with it. So I think it just takes constant education because of the turnover in your state assembly and Senate. Your representatives change frequently. So you've got to have a presence not only in the community, in your host states, political environment, and then because we have an online business, we put a lot of resources into relationships with state attorneys general, and we've been doing that now for 10 years. So whereas we undertook using tools that we found are successful, like memorandums of understanding and memorandums of agreement, we have taken that experience and tried to make it from a multi-state, multi-tribe standpoint with the current environment that we are in.
Thank you. Adam or Governor Naranjo, who would like to go next on that question?
What she hit it right on the nose. It's education, educating all levels of government. It's unfortunate that some of our own legislatures in New Mexico don't even know we're sovereign nations. And a lot of the leadership in Washington, D.C. doesn't even know that we're a sovereign nation, and that the respect is not there at some levels from the state and the local and the federal governments about our sovereign nation. This question has surfaced many times, and we always make a joke out of it that when we go to New Mexico legislature that we need to have 101 Pueblo law, and when we come to Washington, D.C., we would like to get all the representatives to have 101 Pueblo law to let our congressmen and women know who we are and what we are and how long we've been in existence. And so education is something that's reminded every day in our prayers and reminded every day when we talk to our leaders in all levels a few months back, we sponsored the tribal police parity, and Adam was a part of all that. And we educated legislatures and senators about the Police Parity Act and how to be sovereign and how to reinforce our small law enforcement organizations that we have throughout New Mexico or throughout the country. And by doing that, it encouraged other legislatures and senators to join the Police Parity Act so that we could get individual funding to retain our police officers, to retain our dispatchers, to try to keep our people, not only from our village, but the visitors that enter in and out of our reservation. We have 14,000 cars that go up and down our highway every single day to Los Alamos. It's our job to protect those people. But we don't have that full sovereign right to arrest non-Indians, only if it's involving domestic violence through the VAWA, through the Violence Against Women Authorization Act. Otherwise, people were taking advantage of our villages and committing crimes in our village and then leaving because we had no jurisdiction over them. Especially our women and children were being abused, and we had no right to. The individuals would leave the village, leave the state, go to another city, and we had no jurisdiction. So by implementing VAWA, implementing our sovereign ways of life to protect our women and children, that allowed us to work collaboratively with the federal government and to hold them to that trust responsibility that is so crucial for us. With the uncertainty now in the Washington, D.C. level, we still got to continue to fight for our sovereignty. And what is sovereignty? Everybody has a different opinion of it. Everybody has a different view of it. I have a different view of being sovereign is not really relying on the federal government or relying on the state government. It's relying on my people and our economic portfolio that we're trying to be self-sufficient, to be truly sovereign, so that way we can implement our own laws because we're not depending on the federal government or the state government for funding or for assistance. But we're not there yet. We have a very small casino, a very beautiful casino, but we never had that. We have our beautiful mountains. We had the best fishing, the best camping, the best recreational area in northern New Mexico, and we suffered 4 fires that started outside of our boundaries. They protected the lab, they protected all the neighboring communities, but they never protected our village. It was left up to us. 100% fish kill, lost all our cabins, lost everything. 14 years later, we're still suffering from floods every year. It wipes out our traditional farming areas, it wipes out our roads. And so we rely on federal assistance, we rely on other help so we can recover and help heal Mother Nature. And so we had to turn to a different way of survival. And we're very blessed that we did open up a small casino, opened up some gas stations, we opened up a beautiful golf course that supplements our ways of life. It helps our school. We run our own school. We teach our own language to our children from early childhood to 6th grade. And so education is key on our survival. Education is key on how we're going to be sovereign, how we're going to truly be sovereign, but we still need that assistance from our federal government, from our state government, from our shareholders that play a crucial role in the survival of our children and the ones that are yet to come. That's who we're doing this work for, so that they have a better future than we have. And so education is key. And this Law Enforcement Parity Act that Adam and I spoke about really changed a lot of congressional minds because they had no clue, because a lot of states don't have tribes, or if they do have tribes, they tend not to pay much attention to us. And so it's our job as leaders to advocate on our behalf, advocate on our children's behalf, so that we could truly be sovereign.
Adam?
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess a few things. So one is a lot of like in Louisiana where I'm from, it's not so much an issue in New Mexico and California, but the issue of what is a tribe, who's an Indian. I once had a state official call me because in Louisiana they were trying to evict somebody from their house, but the person claimed they were a Mardi Gras Indian, so the state law didn't apply, and so they had to call me, a law professor, to ask if that was an actual legal issue. I'm like, don't have to worry about that, folks. But yes, I mean, there's lots of ignorance to the point that they highlighted. Another one is the tax issue. So lots of people assume like tribes are tax-free zones, when in reality they're actually double taxed. A Supreme Court case out of New Mexico in 1989, the Supreme Court held that the state of New Mexico can tax oil produced on the Hickory Apache Reservation, even if the tribe itself is taxing. So this begs the question, if you're a business, do you want to be taxed by two governments, or would you rather be taxed by one government? So if you're a tribe, and even if you have economic development, oftentimes you cannot tax it because the state's already taxing it. And nobody's going to, do business if you're taxing on top of that. So that puts tribes at a huge disadvantage from an economic development standpoint. And the other one is that states often assume it's a win-lose situation. When tribes do well, states lose, when the evidence overwhelmingly shows that is definitely not the case. Mississippi Choctaw is probably the best example. They were the poorest people in the poorest state in 1960. Philip Martin went into office, and his whole platform was, hey, when Choctaws create jobs, non-Indians come work for us too. So the state and tribe work together really well, even though Mississippi is not known for racial harmony. Actually, the city of Philadelphia, Mississippi was the first government in the U.S. to ever issue, or state government in the U.S. to ever issue municipal bonds to a tribe. Because Philip Martin went out and reached and emphasized that point. When he took over in the 1960s, the tribe had about $100,000 in assets. When he left, it had over $1.3 billion in assets. Now the state depends on Mississippi Choctaw to create 10,000 jobs. So when Philip Martin died, the state of Mississippi and his congressional delegation all passed resolutions mourning the loss of Philip Martin. Again, it's not a matter of a racial harmony thing, to Chair Treppa's point. It's a sovereign respect. He created opportunities that made life better for everybody. So that's, I think, something that needs to be emphasized. Whenever tribes do well, it's not just tribes that benefit. It's the local communities benefit as well.
Well, thank you for those thoughtful answers. Our second question for everyone is, what are examples of partnerships with state or federal agencies that have worked well, and what made them effective?
So I'll start this one. So I guess law enforcement, Louisiana, where I'm from, like Tunica Biloxi tribe. So it does well economically. So it has the only drug dog in like a 6 parish, or what you guys call county. Everybody else calls county area. So if you need a drug dog service in like a 6 parish area, you're calling the tribe to get that service, and the tribe goes provide it for free. So that's an example of tribes working together with states. Tribes and state often work together on like wildlife management, because a deer don't care where the reservation boundary stops. It's just going to hop on its merry way. So several tribes and states have worked together on things like that well, and I'll let Chair Treppa go further.
I mentioned the early days when we were reestablishing our government. Because of our initial efforts were to build a casino, we undertook meeting with the local authorities, one of which was a state agency. So Lake County is a very rural area. It's the population's 60,000 roughly. So they don't have all the things like a Pittsburgh has. So a state agency does the emergency services in the county, North Shore Fire Protection District. They were one of several memorandums of understanding that we undertook to negotiate, because, we're a tribe, but we only have 11 acres, and this where the casino is going to be. we don't have the resources to have emergency services or law enforcement, et cetera. So we entered into those arrangements. We paid for it once the casino was to be built. But as I mentioned, that really forged not only the education from the representatives of that state agency, but their locals. They attended, they went to our restaurants. And so it really gained a very solid government to government relationship and mutual respect, so that when issues occurred, such as wildfires, you look it up, there have been multiple wildfires over the past 10 years. I mean, devastating, wiped out families, homes, businesses, et cetera. And one of the years, it impacted us greatly. We had to evacuate everybody that lived in the county, so 40% of our tribe. And there were a lot of really bad Instagram posts that were going out that basically said that they're letting our reservation burn. So that's, the areas within our reservation boundaries, which we had a water system, et cetera, there. But they didn't. In fact, they took a plow and were building a barrier around our water system. None of us were there. We all had to be evacuated. And, it was heartening to see that they valued us as much as they should. I don't think a lot of our members took much faith in that they would protect us, but they did. And I think that came from a lot of hard work and relationship building and doing everything that we had done. And although, that was a state agency and the sheriff is a county agency, the sheriff, because there were still areas that were cordored off that they would not let anybody go in to look at their homes and so forth, because we were a government. They respected that, and the sheriff let us go in and see whose houses were still standing, and we were able to take pictures and make sure our citizens felt comfort that their homes were still standing. So that's just one of many examples I could get.
Governor.
So as I mentioned, we had those fires in 2011 and four other fires from 2000 to the current. The partnerships we created with FEMA were very, very instrumental on helping us rebuild our canyon. We didn't have no playbook. We have a small force, fire department volunteer, and a small firefighting crew. And so we reached out to FEMA, who came to our rescue. The Army Corps of Engineers, we have a good relationship with the Army Corps of Engineers on our nature-based solutions, what we call it, using nature to help meander the river and help meander our creeks so that we can one day introduce fish again to our waters. We also have a good relationship with the EPA for our water quality standards so that we can drink the water from a point of origin like we used to. The fires are one thing. It's the flooding that's devastating. And so we had to reach out for professional assistance on how we're gonna help Mother Nature with a big Band-Aid on these fires that we had. And so by working with the Army Corps of Engineers, they brought a lot of solutions, a lot of expertise on how we can use the nature-based solutions using our own rocks and our own material without having put big concrete structures within our forests. How do we use our boulders? How do we use our own natural plants and traditional medicines that were still on parts of the forest that we lost, and how can we move them around so that we could still have those medicines that we continue to use to this day. And then working with those federal agencies, it also brought us to start working with our state government on the use of the fentanyl declaration. We filed a declaration to the state, and our governor, Michelle Grisham, has entertained us with that to bring the National Guard into the city of Espanola, where we encounter a lot of crime, a lot of drug abuse, a lot of alcohol abuse, where our members go into the city to get their fix or what have you. And so we've been working hard with the state agencies, the 3 counties that we reside in, so we can help put a dent in this crime. And again, the collaboration and the partnership is huge for us, because we need that assistance. We need that help. We need those expertise on these disasters that are happening across the country. We've been blessed to get several grants and several recognition on our nature-based solutions on how we're restoring our canyon again, and how we're bringing back the animals, and how we're bringing back the birds, and we're bringing back all the creatures that we thrive on since time immemorial that we've lost in these last 14 years now. With all this work and the partnership that we've gained throughout these years, you can see the benefits. You can see that God's creatures are all coming back to life again. You can see the trees and all the plants that are thriving. But then again, we have these other challenges of the locusts and the other challenges of the Russian olive that are the invasive plants that are interfering with the natural ways of the normal plants that used to be there. And so we've reached out to some of our nonprofit organizations across the country to help us with greenhouses, to help us with our irrigation lining, so that we're not continually repairing our old traditional ditches. And so we use that assistance to put lining into our ditches so that we don't have these floods anymore, so that our farmers can continue to grow our traditional crops that we thrive off of. And so, and we're still reaching out to partners. So if you guys all want to be a partner, we could use all the help. But those are some of the ways that not only I, but our previous governors and our previous councils that worked, and also working with the laboratory and the national parks. We have the Vallecanderos to our west and Bandelier. We're one of the only tribes in the country that has cooperative agreements with the national parks, so that we can help them with their forest cutting. We can help them with trail maintenance. We can help them with the restoration projects that they have in the national parks, because we border the national parks, and it doesn't make sense for us to do all the work downstream when the upper stream needs that assistance for tree cutting, our headwaters, and so forth and so on. And so those partnerships that we've created and built are long-lasting partnerships, working with the laboratory so that we can have monitoring stations for our water, monitoring stations for our air, because the quality of life that we want is, like I mentioned earlier, we want it to be better for our future. During the time of the atomic bomb era, there were no HEPA filters put on the businesses, on the buildings. So the air that when they were doing the plutonium pits, the air would filter down into our village, not only in the Hispanic village, not only in our villages, but in the Hispanic communities, in the non-Indians as well, up and down the corridor. And so a lot of men suffered cancer at a young age, between 50 and 70. We were losing men left and right. However, the women to this day are living into their hundreds because they were sheltered by the adobes. They were sheltered inside. But as the men were outside breathing in the air coming off of Los Alamos, it put a huge effect on our population of men. And so now with the partnerships that we've created, we monitor the air every day. We monitor our water samples. And those are the kind of partnerships that we're still continuing to grow for the betterment of our community.
Thank you. The next two questions, we had one for Governor Naranjo and then one for Chair Treppa. Governor Naranjo, given your experience in law enforcement and as a tribal leader, could you share your perspective on some of the unique challenges tribal law enforcement agencies face, including jurisdictional complexities, and what an ideal criminal justice framework would look like for Indian country?
So we have a very, very small law enforcement police department. The Bureau of Indian Affairs at one time was the lead law enforcement for the northern communities. I'm very thankful and very blessed. I'm a fourth generation police officer. My great grandfather was the sheriff, and his father, and my dad was the captain of the BIA, and then me and my brother, and now my son is an FBI agent. So he has a lot of shoes to fill, and so growing up in a law enforcement family, we were brought up very strict, very disciplined, and to see how our village and how our departments have changed from a young police officer to now as a tribal leader, it's very difficult. It's very challenging. Nobody wants to be a police officer anymore or a policewoman. Living close to Los Alamos County and Santa Fe County are the most. Los Alamos County is one of the highest paying counties in the country. And so it's hard to compete. It's hard to retain our police officers and dispatchers and teachers and janitors. And so we have to come up with creative ways to and have our creative benefits to retain our people. That's our first challenge that we see. The second challenge that we see is that the cross jurisdiction between the municipalities and the three counties that we reside in. And we're citizens of the state of New Mexico, but yet the liability is not there for our tribal police. Santa Clara has lost more land to private claims than any other Pueblo in New Mexico. So we have a checkerboarded area, just like a lot of tribes across the country. There's tribal land, private property, tribal land, private property. Our casinos on one side, none. A whole different county on the other side. So we have our issues with cross jurisdiction. One county wants to give us the cross jurisdiction, but they also want to give us the work that goes with it. But they don't want to have no reimbursement, or they don't want the liability, but they want us to do the work for them. On the other hand, they don't want us to do the work. They don't want them calling them. They want us to just push the guy across the street so that they can deal with them. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to collaborate all our efforts together with the state, with the counties, on how do we fight crime together? How do we respect one another's jurisdiction? And for some reason, for many, many years, 20, 30 years now, we still haven't found the solution. Every governor in the state of New Mexico and congressional leaders cannot find that solution on how we can be one. And that's the challenges that we face. They want us to go to the state police academy to learn their state laws, but there are federal issues we can't charge our individuals in state court, or do we charge them in federal court? We have our own judicial system where we can charge Indians from other countries, from other states within our jurisdiction, but we can't charge non-Indians, only if it's related to domestic violence. So we've implemented our VAWA laws to protect the governor, police officers, tribal officials, in that sense. But still, we still don't have that full jurisdiction over poaching, over trespassing, over simple assaults. So it makes it very challenging for us. As mentioned before, what do you do with the individuals? If the city police don't want to handle it, then you call the county. The county don't have the manpower. Then you call the state. The state comes in and says, well, I didn't see it, so we'll just let him go and write him a ticket. And so the guy walks away with a simple ticket. And so those challenges that we face across Indian country in regards to liability, in regards to cross commission, and in regards to serving the people is very difficult. And we're still looking for some solutions on how we can utilize each other's expertise to find the ultimate goal. And then going to that point where if someone's arrested, where do you house them? We could house criminals in our casino cheaper than the county jail. So the county jail in New Mexico, they're monopolizing us using the tribes. If you want to put your prisoner in our jail, it's almost $300 a night. Is that fair justice? Is that we just don't have those facilities. We don't have those treatment facilities. We send our individuals to treatment, but they come back home and they relapse because they're putting them back in the same environment again. We just don't have those expertise, and we don't have those abilities to put our people in treatment and then have them heal. So we're buying our land back. We're slowly buying our buildings back. We're slowly buying our property back from the city of Espanola within hopes of creating a long-term treatment facility, because currently we're sending some of our individuals to San Francisco because it's cheaper to send them there than it is in New Mexico. And so those are the challenges that we face. We're open to any suggestions from each and every one of you. Please reach out to us that we could find some way to make it right for the counties to have that liability across the board, whether there's a shooting or a non-shooting. If someone gets hurt, nobody wants to take the blame. Nobody wants to be responsible for whether it was justified or not. And so with that, I open it up to my colleagues to help me out. Thank you.
Well, you guys could jump in on that question now if you want. Adam, did you want to jump in, or Chair Treppa?
Well, yeah, I guess the main thing, Governor's already touched upon it, the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act would go a long way towards helping the funding. Otherwise, I guess to the premise of my book, if we just treated tribes like government, let the tribe arrest the bad guys who do bad things on tribal land, that would make a lot easier for tribal police and disincentivize criminals. Because, criminals actively target reservations because they know if you're a non-Indian, you do bad stuff on the reservation and the victim's an Indian, the state can't do anything, the feds probably aren't, and the tribes can't do anything. So, why not? If you want to do bad things, it's the perfect place, the way the law is currently set up. So, unfortunately, we need Congress to act. It's taken small steps with the Violence Against Women Act, but still a long way to go.
We don't have that experience because we don't have land. So we have very little land. As I mentioned, we do have a memorandum of understanding for law enforcement when it comes to our lands. I think our biggest challenge when it comes to law enforcement is the misunderstanding of whose jurisdiction it is, criminal versus, civil. And in fact, a good example and a bad example. So I mentioned our reservation boundaries are still there, but we don't own the land within it. We have a couple little properties, but there was a terrible understanding of where jurisdiction begins and ends as a result of that. Probably, I'm going back 15 years or so, to the effect that there had been a policy by emergency services that if there was a potential risk to the first responders, that they would require staging, which required a police escort to go to someone calling for help. Apparently, without communicating to the tribal government, there had been an issue at this one property, which happened to be a tribal member's property. The week prior to, somebody called for emergency, and they went out, and there was some drunken and disorderly going on, and they called names at the first responders. Well, no one contacted the tribe and let us know that to be able to deal with the citizen, such that a week or two later, we had a family member's, we had a tribal member's significant other in respiratory arrest, and they called for, emergency services, and they would not go to the house because it was near that house. And so the emergency responders stayed about a half a mile away waiting for the sheriff to escort them in. And the woman passed away. And so that evoked a huge response by the tribe, as you can imagine, but we negotiated it and resulted in them actually giving us a written policy, and that policy included they had to notify the tribal government, because without communication, had they let us know, we could have done something to rectify that. And eventually, that had a resolution itself. We've never had that issue again. And as a part of our outreach and education, we put on trainings on PL 280, on VAWA, on the Indian Child Welfare Act, and all the issues around jurisdiction. There's another state law, AB 52 in California, around cultural protection resources, cultural protection around cultural resources, that we also do a lot of training on. So a bad issue that resulted in a positive outcome, but that generally isn't our issue, because we don't own vast acres, and we have 300 tribal members, 40% of which live in the county, but none of them live on tribally owned land. So it's an ongoing issue that we advocate for when we go to the federal government. We do a lot of government relations work at the federal level, at the state level, and as I mentioned, at the AG level, to educate. But it's not a direct experience we routinely have.
Thank you, Chair Treppa. You mentioned your tribe doesn't have a lot of land, but our next question is directed at e-commerce. And so we wanted to ask, what is the role of e-commerce for tribal economies, and also how much you replied to the potential criticism that e-commerce is not part of tribal culture.
I'll speak to the last one first. As Adam mentioned in his presentation earlier, just because a tribe is required or needs economic development does not make us less culturally in tune. It is a mandatory matter to create an economy for a tribe that has nothing. And you've got to do it in some way. And although, gaming, as mentioned earlier, has been a great benefit to some tribes, it is not to tribes that are rurally situated, which most tribes are by design. Either we were forced to be relocated or we were moved because of, confrontation to an area that typically is less desirable. Our tribe, however, lives within the area that we've lived since time immemorial. But that also means we have to think outside the box. Yes, we acquired 11.24 acres. We put it in trust for the purposes of gaming. We opened a casino after many challenges with compacting with the state. We opened the doors only to find that there were, the market we knew was already saturated. There were 3 casinos when we opened our casino. Every road leading into the county also had casinos on it. So there just wasn't going to be a business that required foot traffic that was going to be meaningful at all. We had 11 acres with limited land, limited resources on it. It's not like, you have an oil field or something like that. So we had to think differently, think in the modern technology related way. So we leveraged the internet, like many tribes are these days, to allow consumers to access our jurisdiction. Just like as if they got in their car and drove to our reservation, they are accessing our reservation by use of the internet. So as a result of necessity and lack of resources, we have leveraged the internet to build an online business. And as a result of that, we have done a lot of work over the last 10 years educating in the attorneys general space, because the consumers, AG Torres in my colleague's state, their consumers or their constituents are our consumers. So we have entered into a memorandum of understanding about exchanging information and how we deal with any kinds of complaints with the state of New Mexico, stemming back to his predecessor, Hector Balderas, AG Balderas, who now happens to sit on our board of our endowment. We have, benefited by building those relationships over the course of the last 10 years. And just like we educate in our state, we educate across the United States in the attorneys general space by use of many of the organizations that help AGs get elected and support them over their tenure. So there's a Democrat AG association and there's a Republican AG association. And then there are some others that we have been working with for many years that are now, one in particular, holding an annual tribal attorneys general conference just to provide a platform to help educate AGs and help educate tribal leaders as to how they can better collaborate. And so we have done that. E-commerce is becoming the way a rurally situated tribe can have access to markets that they couldn't otherwise. And it requires proper diligence, proper enacting of laws, proper regulation, and proper education. So many tribes are now entering into the space, so that some of the organizations that we work within as a tribe, the National Congress of American Indians, for one, has passed because we are a member there, and it's a resolution-based organization. So they support things once they go through a process of being approved via resolution. So they have taken up the issues, and we have been able to define and have them advocate for what is now called tribal digital sovereignty, because of the modern world is more and more digitally based, that it now requires thinking about how we all live and work within a digital space. So data sovereignty, digital sovereignty, all of those types of terms and topics are bubbling up to the surface. AI is becoming a big issue of late. And how do we work collaboratively within states and tribes and the federal government to protect consumers and to protect, from a tribe standpoint, its tribal data, its members' data, and how can we leverage, the internet to further the economies of not only rurally situated tribes, but rural areas of the country that have historically not had access to the internet. So I tend to think our tribe is kind of out there in front because of necessity. I now sit on the FCC's Office of Native American Policies Tribal Task Force. As a result of our efforts, I also now sit on the board of the American Indian Policy Institute at ASU, who has just created the Center for Tribal Digital Sovereignty with the intent to help develop proper policy and codes and good governance for tribes. There's a lot of activity around this space now, and our tribe has been very involved in all of that.
We are standing in the way of us and eating, so we'll try to wrap it up quickly. But I wanted to ask just briefly, what is the one best opportunity to strengthen tribal sovereignty that you see over the next decade?
Next decade. With the AI thing, maybe we can upload my book into the minds of legislatures and Congress, and they'll respect tribes as governments, and we'll be problem solved.
I would continue to pray for our partnership and true trust responsibility from our leaders in Washington and across the state. Without partnership and collaboration and respect for one another, we're all going to suffer one way or another. And I think that education and the mutual respect for one another across the board is going to be the key to moving forward. The power of prayer and whatever religion you believe in is so crucial. Without the power of prayer, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yes, I'll bring us home. I think I just rinse and repeat: education, education, education. And, at the federal level, legislation that protects tribal sovereignty would be great. We've got to reverse hundreds of years of very bad federal policy. And we're here today. We're not going anywhere. And there are well-organized, concerted efforts to try to dismantle tribal sovereignty. There are actual groups that are well-funded that are taking pieces of federal legislation, federal laws like the Indian Child Welfare Act, and using that to upend tribes. They are trying to redefine tribal governments as a race, and once that occurs, then it violates equal protection. It violates, in the case of Indian child welfare, certain states' anti-commandeering laws, and we have got to fight back. And it's unfortunate that a lot of tribes have not recognized what is going on. They all know about certain cases that have come to the Supreme Court, like Burkine, the baby Veronica case, both around the Indian Child Welfare Act. There's Maverick, which was around same claims around Indian gaming. There is the Ultima case that is challenging 8A corporation structures, all trying to focus on redefining tribes as a race, and we cannot have that. And so we have got to be well organized too and educate.
Yes, Jen? Yes, all right. I didn't know what you, all right. All right, we'll open it up now to questions from the audience. I can bring around, should I bring around the mic? Want to do it?
Yeah, just if we have one question here. Any other questions?
Hello, my name is Andrew. I am a master's student here, and I also do some work with CGM. I have a question for Adam. How would this sovereignty look in practice? Like, would Indigenous peoples vote in US elections? Would they be able to move freely throughout the country? How would this sovereignty look?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, they'd definitely be able to vote in the federal elections as far as I'm concerned. They're definitely U.S. citizens. You could quibble on whether they should be state citizens or not, Indians. That could be more complicated outside of this. But basically how it would work, a good example is out of New Mexico. So lots of states have these laws that prevent car manufacturers from selling cars directly to consumers. Obviously they're great for car dealers, but they're not so great for consumers. Lots of studies show they just increase the price of cars and don't add any public safety benefits. So New Mexico, like many states, made it illegal for like Tesla to operate essentially. So what Tesla did was partner with Pueblo in New Mexico. And now, instead of just having to go to Colorado or Utah to get your Tesla, you just drive, an hour or so from Santa Fe or Albuquerque, and you can access the Tesla. Nobody's hurt in the process. Arguably the car dealers are, but should they be there in the first place? That's the market talking, maybe. So that would be kind of my model of how it would work. Tribes would just be able there to, adapt their laws like other governments and compete. So basically just an expansion of federalism is essentially how I see it.
That sounds like common sense to me. I really appreciate it. And one follow-up for you two. Tell me if I misunderstood or if things have changed. I heard about the Violence Against Women's Act and how that allowed for people to be arrested on sovereign land regarding abuse. But it sounded to me that other crimes were not protected, that someone could go in, a non-Indigenous person could go into the reservation, commit a crime, and they couldn't be arrested. Is that correct?
That's correct. Through the elephant decision, tribes had jurisdiction over non-members for any kind of crime. And once that decision was overturned, that's why we implemented VAWA to have some type of protection for our women, our children, in regards to domestic violence. If another native from another tribe was in our jurisdiction and was assaulted, we could have that jurisdiction. However, non-Indians, very difficult, very challenging.
Wow.
You're absolutely correct. It's absolutely correct.
Tribes have civil jurisdiction. It depend upon the state, don't have necessarily full criminal jurisdiction. They have criminal jurisdiction over their people and other tribal people on tribal lands, just not non-tribal people, other than violence against women.
There's some crimes, homicide, child abuse, violent crimes that, of course, the federal government the FBI will come in, right? But if they don't meet that criteria, they're not gonna entertain it at all.
Hi, thank you so much. This is a really fascinating conversation. Actually, very much following up on the last point that he was asking about, because I think it it does seem so shocking and horrible. You had mentioned that Congress is moving very slow, like VAWA and other small things, but the core of it, just that you should be able to enforce laws on anyone in your jurisdiction. I'm just would be curious to hear, like, what is the counter? What is it that people are afraid of? Like, when Congress is like, we're only going to do this for women and children, like, what about everyone else? And why would they not care about that? It seems like understanding that would be really helpful for people who would want to advocate to, yeah. So if you could expand on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Interestingly, it wasn't until 1978 this became the law. So that's what kind of makes it even screwier. For like 200 years, you could do it. In 1978, it becomes magically a problem. Yeah, so that makes it extra weird. But yeah, the argument is essentially, if it's a criminal case, you're going to have a non-Indian who's in front of an all-Indian jury potentially. So there might be bias. But of course, whenever there are Indians in state court and it's an all non-Indian jury, that's cool. But yeah, it's a problem. And that's what the big argument tends to come up in Congress. And tribes are also extra constitutional sovereign, so they're not bound by the Bill of Rights. So there's the Indian Civil Rights Act, which copies most of the provisions, but it's not all of them. There's no evidence of like widespread abuse, but the potential possibility of a single tribe doing something bad results in no tribe being able to protect any of their citizens, essentially. And that probably isn't fair, but that's Congress tends to toe that line pretty tightly. And I guess on the VAWA point, which is extra silly, so you're fair for domestic violence, but you're not fair if, you kick the husband while you're at it, or like, the son, so like it doesn't make any sense. So, yeah.
So in Santa Clara, when COVID came, we had to shut down our village. And so in a way, COVID was bad, but in a way, COVID was good for us because we implemented our membership. Either you're a member or a non-member. And so Valerie here is considered a non-member. She's with me, but she still needed an ID for her to gain access in and out of the village. So if she didn't have an ID, she wasn't allowed. And so we actually had one of our first court cases where we had a non-Indian go to our court in regards to ask for a jury trial. And so part of our jury selection was getting the non-Indian and the members as part of the jury selection to be fair and to be biased. And it worked really well because the non-member, the non-Indian had non-members as part of the jury. And so it balanced out and it worked in our favor, but it gave the individual that opportunity where it was fair across the board.
There we go. I mentioned civil jurisdiction. So there's a general rule around tribes and civil jurisdiction over non-members off the reservation. And that is that generally the tribe does not have jurisdiction off the reservation for non-members, except if the non-member agrees to be subject to that tribe's jurisdiction, such as a lease or a contract. And or if it is of, I had to look it up real quick, if it is a tribe may regulate non-members whose conduct threatens the political integrity, economic security, or health and welfare of the tribe. So it's complicated, hence education.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. We look forward to hopefully seeing you again in Pittsburgh. And we just wanted to say thank you so much for coming out. So everybody, big round of applause.